Welcome. My name is Dr. Jeffrey Emge, Professor of Oboe at the University of Texas at Tyler. And you're watching the beginning of one of my instructional videos on how to prepare for the 2023 Texas TMEA All-Region Etudes for Oboe. This video will cover several parts on Etude number 28 in C minor, a very difficult etude. Only 22 measures long, but full of extreme registers, 16th notes, fast tempo, and a lot of different articulations. Today we're going to be looking at measures 1 through 8. Now that we've heard measures 1 through 8, let's get into the nuts and bolts of learning this part of the etude. We'll start with the review of the altissimo notes. In measures 1 through 8, we have to play high C sharp, we have to play high D, and we have to play high E flat. Those are the standard fingerings. The only substitute would be if you have to slur up to high D, it is occasionally permissible to slur up to high D with the left index finger raised. Tonguing it, however, should always have the half hole. Let's review the vocabulary necessary to perform this etude. Most of it is in the key of C minor, and so we'll need to be able to play our C minor scale from low C up to high F and back down. Normally, the all-region etudes have a lot of issues about where to breathe and how to phrase. With measures 1 through 8, there are not really any big issues. For the performance, you will have to play all 8 measures in one breath. For practice, though, you can go from measures 1 to the first note of measure 5, and then take a breath and pick it up from there. But for the performance, you probably will not be able to do that. So, deep breathing before you begin this etude. Make sure you have a full tank of air, make sure you're relaxed, and you exhale thoroughly. Inhale deeply before you begin. Those first 8 measures are going to take you somewhere between 20 to 25 seconds to play, so you will need all the air you can get. Now let's take a look at a basic approach to learning the technique. First, learn 5 notes at a time, like this. Once you feel comfortable with one measure doing 1 beat plus a note, then play 1 measure plus a note. From there, work up to 2 measures plus a note, 4 measures plus a note. Finally, all 8 measures. It's probably a good idea to practice many times with a metronome. I've got a metronome set right here. This is a good basic tempo. Don't freak out, that's not the quarter note I'm using. That'll be the 8th note, so 1 E and a, 2 E and a. That's a good basic approach to learning the technique for this etude. Start in small bits and work your way gradually up to larger pieces. For the oboist, there are 3 possibilities for the note F: regular F, forked F, or left F. Let's take a look at some of the issues for F in the first 8 measures. We have in measure number 3, it can be played, of course, with left F. But for a fast speed, I don't recommend it. So I've marked in my music, and I recommend you too, for measure 3, that you play forked F. Then in measure number 6, the F at the beginning of that measure will be regular F. And that's pretty much all there is for the first 8 measures. Later on, it's going to get more interesting. Many of the Ferling etudes have a dynamic marking and then nothing written for a long time. We have an initial crescendo, and that's pretty much it. So you'll notice I've written some additional dynamics that I do a little bit to give some shaping to phrases. You'll notice measure number 3, there's a little bit of a diminuendo at the end. And then it'd be a good idea to crescendo bit by bit through measure 4. That's just natural. In measure 6, a little bit of a diminuendo as we descend. And finally, in measure number 7, a crescendo as the music ascends. These do not have to be obvious. A small amount adds interest to the listener. You will be practicing arpeggios a lot for this etude. Let's take a look at the ones used in the first 8 measures. In measure 3, we have what's called the B diminished arpeggio, B, D, F, A flat. That's very tricky. And then we've got a C major arpeggio of sorts in measure number 5. It's got a little chromatic neighbor tone in there. Then in measure 5, we also have an F minor scale. Notice I've even written it and bracketed for my practice. Measure 6 features the F minor arpeggio itself, with some extra notes. Finally, this very difficult C minor arpeggio in measure 8. You'll notice Ferling uses the number 2 when he refers to the left E flat key. If the number 2 annoys you, you can write L over it like I have, or you could even white it out using a bottle of whiteout. Don't make too much of the staccatos. At a fast speed, no one will be able to tell that you're tonguing staccato. Instead, use a light tongue, as light as possible. Also look measure to measure at your initial practice and make certain that you're playing the articulation variety. There is quite a variety of tongue and slur patterns in this etude. For your first practice sessions with this etude, set a metronome to 100 to 120. That will be your 8th note tempo, something slow that you can be successful on initially. Don't try to go faster until you can play one big section, like measures 1 through 8, at 8th note 100 to 8th note 120. Only then go slightly faster day by day. Remember, journal your progress. Now let's look at some steps to build tone quality and intonation awareness. Since this etude is in the key of C minor, it would be natural to start with the note C. I've got a tone generator here for the note C. Let's match it. Compare octaves. You could even do the same thing, have the tone generator playing at a softer volume while you practice a small amount. If you wish, you can also check the note G using this manner. Start with matching a particular note, compare octaves, and then allow the tone generator to play while you listen and match that pitch level. Every day, start with long tones before you practice this etude. You'll then be relaxed, both in the airstream producing part of your body and in your hands. and you'll be able to play much better with a clearer sound. Always remember, focus on keeping the airstream flowing and keep your face still while you move the fingers. At the all-region etude, you are allowed to play one note before you begin the etude. Since this etude's in the key of C, choose C5, C in the staff, as your starting pitch. Starting with your first days of practicing the all-region etudes, have a journal with you. And inside that journal, write what did you practice, what tempos did you use, and just as important, your reaction. Did you feel good about the practice? Do you feel you got a lot done? Did you feel frustrated? If so, why? The journal serves two purposes. It is a record that keeps you focused on the next day, and it also will allow you to look back with a sense of pride on all the progress you made from the beginning of your practice to the all-region auditions. The all-region auditions are very competitive, and you should practice every day and use a metronome. Good luck. Welcome back. This is part 2 of the series of videos on etude number 28 in C minor, one of the etudes for the TMEA Oboe All-Region auditions for 2023. Etude number 28 is mostly in the key of C minor. It's only 22 measures long, but it's very, very difficult to play, lasts about a minute, and it's got a lot of tricky arpeggios and very wide leaps. Today we're going to be focusing on the second part of the etude, measures 9 through 17. Now that you've heard the second part of the etude, let's do a small amount of prep work before we get into the details of the practicing and rehearsing. The first thing we're going to do is review the altissimo notes necessary to perform the second part of the etude. We're going to look at high D flat and high E flat. The high D flat is performed like this. Left hand, second and third fingers. Right hand, first finger and the low C key. There's no octave key. The high E flat is very, very tricky because it is a wide leap that's slurred. There's a special trick fingering we use for that. The high E flat slurred fingering with the leap is the following: 2-3 and the right hand 2-3, no octave key. I know it sounds really weird, right? But it overblows very well to the high E flat on a big leap like the one you have in this section. Now this section of the etude is not completely in C minor. Starting at measure 9, we suddenly change keys to the key of A flat major. So let's review the A flat scale quickly. A flat, B flat, C, D flat, E flat, F, G, A flat, which means we're either going to involve left forked F, right forked F, or the left F key, depending on the circumstance. So quickly, let's go through the fingers again for the A flat scale, 1 octave. A flat, B flat, C, D flat, left E flat, left forked F, G, and A flat. You should practice those both slurred and tongued to prepare for measures 9 through 12. Now let's look at the phrasing necessary for this part of the etude. When you first start practicing, you'll probably be at a slow enough tempo that you won't be able to play all 8 measures in one breath. So to prepare for that, I have a suggestion for you. Take a look at the first note of measure 13, the F sharp. That's probably a good place to stop and take a breath while you're in the middle of practicing. That end of the phrase will sound something like this. Now, as you get faster with your tempo in practice and at the performance, you will need to perform all 8 measures in one breath. So get used to breathing very, very deeply at the end of measure 8. A deep inhale from the chest and the stomach, not using the shoulders at all. Okay, now let's take a look at some of the basic steps to learning the technique. The first step is to go through one measure in a note and try slurring it without using articulation. So the first measure of this section would be played something like this in your initial practice. You'll notice I've given you some suggestions in the music itself. Yes, normally I would play left F, but at a fast speed, it's awkward and also the oboe will move around a little bit. I don't want to take any chances with the tone wavering. So I suggest for you, go ahead and use forked F in that measure. Once you've gone through and slurred every measure, go back and put the articulations in, but tongue legato. This will allow you to focus again on a relaxed throat and oral cavity and an airstream that's continuous. The second step of your practice then will sound something like this. Finally, add the dynamics. So most of the initial practice will take place at a mezzo level, a medium volume at which you can sound your best. After you've worked one measure at a time plus a note, go to 2 measures, then 4 measures, finally the entire 8 measure segment. One of the many technical issues for oboes is which F to use, the regular F or the left F or the forked F. In this section, when F occurs, you're going to be using forked F. I say that because of the speed of the etude and the otherwise awkward use of left F going back to the right hand little finger. So for speed purposes, you'll probably be best served by playing forked F throughout this 8 measure section of the etude. There are some places to add small dynamic changes in order to add interest to the music. The first one is right at measure 9. You can add a small crescendo at the end of the measure, and then at the end of measure 10, add a small diminuendo. The same thing happens in measure 11. Add a small crescendo and then a small diminuendo at the end of measure 12. Finally, at the end of measure 15, one more small crescendo, and then the last 2 beats of measure 16, add a small diminuendo. Now let's take a look at one of those places, measures 11 and 12, a small crescendo and diminuendo. Measures 9 through 17 have a number of arpeggios, and they should be practiced separately. The first one is in measure 11, the C major arpeggio. Then in measure 12, you have F minor arpeggio. These arpeggios are disguised by a few neighbor tones, but the arpeggio is still there. Finally, measure 13. Very, very difficult. There are 2 different arpeggios that have to be negotiated. Practice them separately. First is the F sharp diminished. I'll play from the low note to the high note, F sharp up to C. And then the diminished 7th chord on B, B, D, F, A flat, starting on F, which again is a little bit awkward because the very first F on B3, probably that one is played with the regular F fingering. And you'll notice it's very, very awkward. You have regular F, B, A flat forked, D, B, A flat, forked F, then E flat in measure number 14. Then in measure number 14, we have the C minor arpeggio, and then the A flat arpeggio. I've marked both of them on the page for you. And then finally, a B diminished 7 again at the end of the excerpt, measure 15. Very, very difficult. You may recall that when I did the run-through earlier in this part of the presentation, I did the fermata rest and went on to the next note. That's a really good idea to practice. You decide between you and your private teacher how many beats of rest you want to use, and then stick with that number and write that number in at the fermata rest. That way you're always thinking in tempo. Get used to having a definite number of beats of rest and focus on preparing for the low C that's coming up. For your initial practice, set a metronome to an eighth note tempo of about 100 to 120. Work one measure. Only when you feel completely comfortable with the tone quality and the smoothness of fingers should you try to increase the tempo. I like to practice initially in a practice session with the eighth note as the beat. And then once I get up to about 144 or 160 to the eighth note, then I switch over to quarter notes. Your goal for all region auditions is probably somewhere between 80 to 92. If you play with a good sound and you don't miss notes or articulations at 80 to 92, you have an excellent chance of making all region. As I mentioned in part 1 of this video for the etude, there are many articulation issues. The articulation changes frequently. Look at one measure at a time, and at your initial practice sessions, make certain you're playing exactly what's on the page. If you learn incorrectly the articulations, it will be much more difficult to retrain yourself to perform the correct articulations. And you notice there's a variety of articulations. For example, measure 9, you have tongue 1, slur 3. And then the next measure, most of it is in pairs. So there's a variety of articulations, at least 5 different types of articulations just in those 8 measures. Be very, very careful. It's even okay to go back and take the oboe away from your mouth and practice saying the articulations to make sure that you have the patterns down. For example, measure 9 might be practiced like this. Dee-ah-ha, da-dee-ah-ha, dee-dee-ah-ha, dee-dee-ah-ha. If you find your chops are getting tired, it's okay to take the oboe out of your mouth and just practice fingers with a met or even say the articulations with a met. Now let's talk for a moment about building tone quality and improving intonation. To start off with, find a metronome or a tone generator that plays pitches and turn it to C. A lot of this composition is in C major, so match C. Finally, compare that C with the octave above. And even go through and play small sections with the tone generator playing the note C so you can hear yourself playing with another instrument. By comparing and listening to a pitch standard, you stand a much greater chance of playing in tune throughout the etude. Go back always before and after your practice sessions and play long tones and listen to the quality of your sound. Aim for that quality of sound even though you're moving your fingers and tongue quickly. If you find that you don't like your sound, you're probably playing a little too loud to control. There's nothing wrong with practicing at a mezzo piano level. This is the end of Etude number 28, part 2. I wish to remind you that if you'd like to take private lessons, my email address is on this slide, and also I am available for Zoom coaching. I wish you all the best in your practice sessions and your preparation for the all-region auditions in December. Welcome back for part 3 of Etude number 28 in C minor, one of the videos for the all-region etudes for Texas 2023 oboe. This part of the etude is the most difficult. The etude overall is not very long. It's only 22 measures, so it lasts about 40 seconds. But wow, what an incredible display of technique that's required for the student. And we're going to be looking at the last section, starting after the fermata rest. So let's start by hearing it played. All right, before we get into the nuts and bolts of the technical aspects and musical aspects of this section of the etude, let's review first a few things. Number one, the altissimo notes needed for this part of the etude. Let's look at high E flat and high F. High E flat is a standard fingering. The left hand half hole, 2, 3, and the low B natural key. In the right hand, second and third fingers. Now, because we have to go from E flat to high F, we're going to play high F on what's called the right side, which means octave key, half hole, 2 and 3. We'll use the right side A flat key, and then 2, 3 in the right hand. So we're going to go from high E flat, normal fingering, to the high F using the right side A flat key. Now let's look at the arpeggios needed to perform this part of the etude. Measures 17, 19, and 21 use the C minor arpeggio. Now normally we would play it C, E flat, G, etc. But this one's broken up with some neighbor tones. So let's review the basic arpeggio first. Throw in the neighbor tones as they're written. Then, of course, at 19, it's a little bit more complicated. And then we have some neighbor tones, etc. Then at 21, we go back to the low register, which we will have to use left E flat a couple of times. Those are the C minor arpeggios. Now let's look at measure 18. Measure 18 has an arpeggio that we would call the G7 flat 9. That sounds really complicated, but it's 5 notes, G, B natural, D, F, and A flat. It will sound like this. And if you look at measure 18, you will see all those notes are present, just out of order. And finally, we get to the pièce de résistance, measure 20, which has what's called a B diminished 7 arpeggio, B, D, F, A flat. And it has to go all the way up to high F. So we're going to start playing those notes, B, D, F, A flat, starting on F. And you'll definitely want to practice it up and down before you actually try the music as it's written. Those are the arpeggios used in these last 7 measures of the etude. Now let's look at the basic steps necessary to learn the technique of this section. The first step will be taking one measure and a note, one measure and a note, okay, again. Now let's look at the basic steps necessary to master the technical aspects of this section of the etude. We'll start by playing a measure, and we will play it all slurred slowly. We do this to make sure that our fingers are moving smoothly between note to note and there are no blips in the finger coordination. The second step is to play the same measure and add the articulation. Once you've mastered one measure at a time with the articulation, then go to 2 measures plus a note. Then you'll work up to 4 measures, 5 measures, 6 measures, the entire excerpt. Separately, you will need to work the altissimo notes. Go back and review E flat to F. Tongue it. Add the D neighbor tone. Finally, put everything in context, going back one full beat before that. You will end up practicing that part of the etude many, many, many times every day. Finally, mark the L for left E flat in the 2 places that I've shown you on the music. You must play left E flat at those spots. There are 2 places we have to think about and plan for how we play the note F, and they're both in measure 20. Now you'll notice I have marked in the sample music to use forked F. That is going to be the easiest way to play it when you play it fast. When you play it slow, it will sound like the F is slightly out of tune. I get that. The alternative, though, is to use right A flat and left F, which I can do, but it's kind of awkward at a fast speed. Super easy slow, but what happens when we play it fast and you have to move the little fingers from the left side to the right side of the oboe? It gets quite a bit more bumpy and a little bit awkward. So for most students, I recommend forked F because the fingering then is in line with the rest of the instrument. Now let's think about a few places to add dynamics to shape the phrase, because you'll notice there's not really anything written by Ferling. So let's look at the first 2 measures. A small crescendo at the end of 17, followed by a diminuendo at the end of 18 is perfect. The next spot we're going to add should be pretty obvious. 19, you've got that C minor arpeggio that climbs all the way up to the high F. Put a crescendo in there. It's natural and will help you gain confidence to play the high F and get it to speak every time. Your initial tempo for practice should be somewhere around 120 to the 8th note. That's pretty slow. 1 A and a, 2 E and a, 3 E and a. Work as slow as you like so that you build confidence and your fingers are relaxed. Only after you get to that stage, relaxed fingers and confidence, should you slowly increase tempo. Most regions, in order to make the all-region band, you'll need to play it between 80 beats a minute, 80 to the quarter note, and 90 to the quarter note. For all-state, I imagine there's going to be some players who can play somewhere between 100 to 104. If you're serious about making all-state, that's a pretty good range to think about for where are you headed over the fall months. In regards to articulations, this section is actually not too difficult. There are not many articulations mixed up. In fact, we only have 2 patterns. We have the tongue 1, slur 3, and then the slur in pairs. And those are the only 2 patterns in this last section of the etude. Now let's look at some steps to improve your intonation and play with a better sound. We'll start off by turning on a tone generator to the note C5, 1 and 1 C. And play and match that pitch. Next, we'll take the tone generator on C5 and we'll play C5, the low C, and then the high C, comparing the octaves. The next step is to play long tone on G, because there's quite a few Gs in this section as well. We'll match it with the tone generator. Then play it with just the tuner. for a consistent, open, and relaxed sound. Think about vibrato. Even though you're playing all these 16th notes, you want to play with the same relaxed throat. At all times, play with your best sound. For many players, that will mean don't play quite as loud as you could play. I would encourage all of you, don't play double F in this composition. It's not necessary to play at your maximum. At the first part of the series on these etudes, I mentioned journaling. I would still encourage you, journal your progress throughout the fall so you can see your rate of progress, and it will give you something tangible to look back on with a sense of pride about how far you've come in learning these etudes. Think about your progress that you will need to make in order to do the auditions in December. By the end of September, you should be playing about 8 measures at a time. October, 12 measures at a time. The first half of November, 16 or more at a time. And then the last 2 weeks before the audition, you should be playing run-throughs every day after a careful warm-up. I want to wish all musicians in Texas who are auditioning on these etudes the best of luck, and please keep practicing every day. Good luck to you all.